Nora. As an active member of the community and a lifelong resident, as well as a trustee for almost 6 years, many people already know who you are. I know that you're not big on self-promotion, but even just being around the community, I always hear people singing your praise, whether it's championing Girl Scouts or just helping people navigate our local government. A lot of people know Nora Lucas. But for those who don't, do you want to just give us a quick recap of who you are?
Well, first of all, I want to thank you for doing this. This is
My
great. I
pleasure.
want to thank LMC-TV or LMC Media also, because this is a great opportunity. I grew up here. I grew up in the town of Mamaroneck. I went to local schools, Mamaroneck High School. So did my husband. When we lived in Boston for a while, we moved down and we moved to Rhinebeck. So our daughter went to the Rhinebeck schools. I'm an architectural historian, so I work on historic preservation projects and environmental review. And I also have been a longtime volunteer in the Village of Mamaroneck, including starting as the chair of the Landmarks Advisory Committee and being on the Flood Mitigation Committee and working on PTSA and Girl Scouts and various other preservation organizations and nonprofits in the county. And I've been a trustee for 6 years, or 5.5 years, and I'm hoping to make it 8.
Sounds great. Okay, so let's just get started with some questions. As a trustee, you are the steward of our tax dollars. Can you talk about how your interests align with those of the taxpayers in the community?
Well, I am a taxpayer in the community, so I notice when those property taxes go up, and I have. One of the most important things we do as trustees is really adopt a budget and make sure we stick to the budget. That and enacting legislation are our 2 main roles. And so I have spent a lot of time working in nonprofit organizations, and nonprofit budgeting is different. So I took a lot of classes with the New York State Controller's Office to learn about government budgets, because they're all on a 1-year cycle. And I'm very keen on making sure that we have a strong reserve fund, that we continuously review our expenses, because we want to maintain services, but we want to maintain services while also making sure that we don't either pierce the tax cap or simply waste money. So I've been pretty consistent in trying to go over the budget on a regular basis annually when we adopt it. We adopt it in April, but we work on it from February through April. And I try to be rigorous about going through the expenses and going through the revenues and making sure that we really think about it every year, so that we don't, waste funds. Okay. And we try to keep the taxes as low as possible. Okay, so everybody's always interested in taxes.
Just as a follow-up question, do you have any ideas about how to keep taxes under control?
Well, I think one thing is to do shared services. We do a lot of work with the village of Larchmont and the town of Mamaroneck, and we can share equipment. Sometimes we share staff for certain projects, like with our sewer truck. So I think sharing services, always looking for ways of sharing services and equipment for things that none of us need full time is one thing. I also feel we've spent a lot of time during my tenure as trustee in repairing buildings that hadn't been properly maintained. So I think we are on a better path, and we should continue to regularly maintain buildings, so that it's very easy to defer maintenance, but then you end up having a much bigger repair at the end. Mm-hmm. And also simply making sure that we aren't spending money that we don't need to spend, that when we hire a new person, it's not just the salary, it's also the all of the benefits, which is a very big chunk of our budget. And a chunk of healthcare and pensions are things that we don't really have control over. So, evaluating whether we need a new staff person or whether we should hire someone on a project by project basis as a consultant.
Okay, interesting. So speaking of tax dollars, the board currently held an emergency meeting where they increased the village manager's current base salary from $243,000 annual salary up to $273,000 by 2026. So that's a $30,000 increase. all the while allowing this village manager to keep a part-time job in another municipality. I know there was a lot of hoo-ha about this. You know, and actually you just mentioned that pension is also a consideration. So I would assume that the pension would get based on a higher salary. So, you know, as a taxpayer, people are interested. Where do you stand on this issue?
Well, I was the lone vote against this. I don't think the meeting was an emergency. There was another year to go on the contract, and we were in the process of renegotiating the contract. So I don't think it was an emergency. I don't think we should have held the meeting on a Friday night at 5 o'clock at the regatta. It should have been done in a public and transparent way. I think a lot of residents feel disenfranchised. I think, and trust us a little bit less because we did this in such a non-transparent way. And I don't think that our village manager or any village manager, it's a position of great responsibility, should be having a part-time job elsewhere. I mean, I think it sets a bad precedent. And so I think the Board of Trustees fell down on the job with that one.
Okay. Okay, so I mean, we live in one of the most expensive regions in the country. If you just listen to people, there's always concern about affordability and quality of life, just from a cost of living perspective. And so many people are struggling to find housing in the community or to stay in the community. Many people may not realize that you were an early champion of affordable housing. Can you give us a little bit of history about your advocacy and maybe your vision for the future?
Sure. So I'm an architectural historian, which means I work on historic preservation projects, and I do a lot of environmental review. And in my career, and I also have worked on a lot of adaptive reuse projects where you take an old building and you repurpose it for another use. And that is a very successful way of doing affordable housing because the costs are less because you've got this building. So when you have a building and you adaptively reuse it, the cost per square foot is much less expensive. So I've worked on those kinds of projects, for nearly 40 years. And I worked with a nonprofit organization, a preservation organization, and the Westchester Housing Fund years ago to develop housing in a variety of places in Westchester County. And I also have continued to pursue my interest in affordable housing by taking a lot of classes at LULA, which is the Pace University's Land Use Law Center, which really helps municipalities and nonprofit organizations and individuals figure out how to develop affordable housing. And I think it's important to remember that affordable housing means it's housing that's affordable for you. It's for some people, it's a $2 million house. For some people, it's, a rental apartment. But you shouldn't be spending more than 30% of your salary on housing. And so affordable housing is something that affects a range of people. It's important to communities because employers need all ranges of workers. They need ranges, they need to hire people who make all different kinds of salaries. And so when we have the ability for people of all different incomes to be able to afford something in a community, it makes the community more diverse. It helps the merchants, it helps the restaurants, because if you're house poor, you simply don't have any disposable income to spend in your community. Mm-hmm. And there are people like teachers and police officers and firefighters are driven out of town and have long commutes to be able to work here. So I think affordable housing helps make a community vibrant. And we are in a community that, there's some people who don't think twice about spending over $1 million on their first house. And there are other people who will never be able to do that. And I know many people who have lived here for so long, they could never afford to live here now, but they're longtime residents. So I think it helps build a healthier community.
Okay. That's great. Okay, so next I want to talk about representation. Obviously, you are a trustee. For those people who are new to the community and don't know how this is organized, the board is made up of 5 votes. So there's 4 trustees and 1 mayor. You are representing the people. I think it's worth noting that you are currently the only Mamaroneck representative on the board right now. So if you were not to get reelected, we would have no representation in Mamaroneck. So I think that's important. What additional perspectives will you bring to the board of trustees that are not otherwise represented?
Well, this is true. We all represent everybody in the village. We're a trustee for the whole village, and we don't have the ward system that they have in places like Yonkers and in Nora. Cities typically have that. So even Portchester has a different kind of spread. So you want to be sure that there's somebody from, optimally, you want people from all the different neighborhoods, maybe not all the different neighborhoods because there's only 5 of us, but you want to have a geographic diversity so that there are people who represent, who understand, if not represent, different school districts. So we have 2 school districts in our community, and we have the Mamaroneck School District, which is a little bit smaller and a smaller portion of the village of Mamaroneck, and then we have the town of Mamaroneck School District, which is a bigger portion of the village of Mamaroneck. And the communities, while it's one community, each group has some different interests. And so I think it's important to have, I think it's important to have at least one trustee from Mamaroneck, because Mamaroneck may have slightly different issues than the town of Mamaroneck. I also think that not just in terms of geographic representation, but I also have a lot of experience because I've been on the board for 5 years. So you do learn a tremendous amount when you're on the board of trustees. I have budgeting experience, I have land use experience, and I also have government experience from my career because I worked for years with state, local, and federal government. So I've appeared before land use boards, I've appeared before, boards of review, I've appeared before the National Park Service. So I understand how state, local, and federal government work. And I've worked for a long time with our upper electeds, our state and county elected officials, who are a great help to us. So I think that relationship is beneficial to the village. And the other perspective is, I think, as I've campaigned, people are concerned about the lack of civility and the perceived lack of respect for the residents. And I think that I always respect the residents. I may not agree with everybody who speaks at a meeting, but I'm always happiest when the meetings are busy, because not just busy, when the meetings are populated, when the audience is there, because I think you have a better feedback about how you're doing, and we need public input. I mean, it's easy to think you have all the answers and think that you know the best way to do something, and it's very important to me to listen to the public because they can change your mind.
That's really interesting. I mean, I think this is a good plug for LMC-TV. Anybody who's new to the community, who doesn't know how to watch these Monday meetings, or people don't have time to go, the community should know that they could log on to lmctv.com and click the municipal button and watch you in action. And, I think the best way to decide if they want to vote for you or not is to take a look. And I think that you do a very good job of, keeping calm and listening to residents. In fact, I think listening is part of representation. Maybe do you want to weigh in on listening and getting feedback from residents?
Sure. I would also say that I hope LMC-TV knows how popular they are, because I don't think they have any Nielsen boxes, but people watch these meetings, and people will call me, people will stop me on the street. People are the only way. We don't have a local paper. When I first moved here, and maybe up until even 10 years ago, there were a couple of reporters in the room, and there would be like a local story. Now we have something called Mamaroneck Observer, which is a volunteer effort by a group of local citizens who come to meetings and who report on what's happening at meetings. But for a long time, there was no reporting. And LMC-TV, covers it and just makes it available. There's, they don't editorialize, they just make it available. So I think that LMC-TV gives people a voice, and if people don't come to meetings in person, they certainly communicate with the Board of Trustees after the meeting, sometimes, and communicate with us individually. And I feel that Tony Ryan put it well. You have to make, she's a retired trustee, you need to make the best decision for the most people. And so I may be persuaded by something I personally maybe don't agree with. I might want a different choice, but I think it's better for the village and better for more people in the village. So I appreciate LMC-TV making these things available, because people watch the meetings and people communicate with us, and feedback makes us better.
Yeah, yeah. And I would encourage anybody who has not caught up to watch some of these meetings. In fact, if you watch the meetings, I think you'll notice that the mayor and current board have often been voting together. They rarely challenge each other, even on significant issues. Oftentimes you have been the sole independent voice, Nora. Can you comment on this?
Yeah, well, I try to do my homework. I do my homework. I don't always agree with my fellow board members, which and I think it's good to have different perspectives. It's good for the Board of Trustees to not always agree, because by talking and collaborating, you can come to a better decision. I know that some of my colleagues are frustrated that I do ask too many questions, and that I don't always go along. It makes the meetings longer, but I continue to be an independent voice, and I would like to continue to be an independent voice for my 4th term.
Sorry about the siren there. Okay, that sounds good. So, flooding is obviously, it's a source of stress and sadness for so many people in our village. While the Army Corps program will help mitigate loss, it will not alleviate flooding altogether. So what measures do you believe are essential for mitigating flooding in the village?
Well, I think the Army Corps plan, is an important start, and it's a long time coming, but it will only mitigate, as you said. So, and where the weather's getting more extreme, we're downstream, we probably can't ever eliminate flooding. And I think we have to be really honest about that, because we can't raise false hopes. But what we can do is strengthen our stormwater laws, which has been on the back burner for the last year or so. And it's something that we absolutely have to do. We also are trying to we're doing some more to clean out the rivers, which I think is something we need to do consistently. The Flood Mitigation Committee has been active in thinking outside the box, in helping us try to forge some creative solutions, which include, making an open swale in the Columbus Park area. And I think something that we need to do is think about these repetitive properties, these repetitive loss properties. And it's, we're in an expensive area of the country, so it's hard to buy people out at an amount that makes sense for them to leave their house. But on the other hand, there are people who have been traumatized by repetitive flooding. And I think we are trying to explore some grants so that we can purchase some properties and let them be floodable areas, leave them empty so that the water that can be absorbed there. And finally, this is not just a Mamaroneck problem. I mean, we get the water, but the water isn't generated from Mamaroneck. And for instance, there's a big project in White Plains at the golf course, the Ridgeway Golf Course. And tonight we have an agenda item. We have a meeting tonight. We're filming this on Monday. And I am proposing that well, it's more than me, but I think we need to hire a consultant and work with the town of Harrison to hire a consultant to attend these meetings. We've asked to be an interested party in this development process, but we would need to make sure that all of the water that's generated by this property is contained on the property and doesn't come downstream. And I think that's something that the Board of Trustees of the two communities and volunteers can't simply manage. I mean, I know you have tried to deal with the land use issue in your neighborhood.
Right.
It's very hard to go to the meetings and keep on top of things. And I think this is a very big project, and we need to hire a consultant who can be our advocate.
Okay, that's very interesting. Yeah. Obviously, flooding is one issue. In the village, also, we have infrastructure that has to constantly be maintained. What initiatives should have priority for infrastructure?
The first initiative that's sort of, it's not just a priority, it's, we're under a consent order is to complete the lining of our sanitary sewer system. So it's been evaluated, we're repairing it. And we also are obligated, and I think this is a wonderful thing, to maintain it. So we have a plan, a maintenance plan, and we will cycle through a certain portion every year, so that in 80 years or 90 years or 100 years, that board of trustees won't be doing this massive project, which has been extremely expensive. And we've been very lucky to get some state grants. Steve Otis has been very good about getting funding for communities, across New York State who are in this situation, because many of us have aging sewer systems and sanitary sewer systems. But this is a huge thing, and we will then, going forward, maintain what we've fixed now. We're also going to do a street study, so like basically a street survey to analyze the condition of the streets and then figure out a paving schedule. Because 4 years ago, 2019, we paved, like 40% of the village. It was a very big chunk of the village. And we did that because the previous administration hadn't done any paving. And we've been a little behind the 8 ball with the pandemic, because there's been the pandemic, there's been IESIS, there's been Ida. I mean, the village has had a lot of turmoil. So we are going to be more systematic about our roads, and we have been very diligent in making sure that we understand when Con Ed's doing work or planned work. Emergency work is emergency work, but Con Ed and the water company both do scheduled work, and we very much are trying to coordinate our road paving with that. So we don't pave before they do work, we pave after they do work. And we've also been, the village manager has been good at getting Con Ed to not just patch, but to pave the entire street. But I think if we complete this street survey, we will be more fair. We will pave the streets on an equitable area, on an equitable basis, a consistent basis. And it's not just the squeaky wheel neighbors to get their new paving, it's everybody. And so those are two big things. And my sort of little pet is that we spent a lot of money repairing buildings because we didn't repair them. I alluded to this earlier. So I think we have to be much more progressive and consistent in maintaining our existing buildings, their resources, their obligation, just like you fix the roof in your house, that we need to maintain our buildings so that we don't get to a point where we have a really big repair.
Okay, that sounds really good. Okay, so Hampshire's been bubbling up again. A lot of people are talking about, I guess, the Mamaroneck School Board in Hampshire. If you're comfortable, could you share your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, Hampshire's been an issue for maybe 12 years in the village now. And when the golf course went belly up, when the golf course closed, I think it would have been great if the town and the village purchased it, but we didn't. So the developer who purchased it was a distressed real estate development company, and they're in it to make money. This is what they do. They develop real estate. And they wanted us to do a zoning change to build a multi-story apartment building on roughly the area that is now the clubhouse. And the previous board of trustees, this happened before I was elected, said no. And Hampshire challenged that no, and won, and the village won. So we did not have to make that zoning change. And the zoning change, and then Hampshire did a proposal for 105 units. The planning board did the evaluation and did the environmental review, and basically determined that it didn't meet the environmental standards, that it was a flood zone, it was ecologically a nightmare, but it was also a risk to human safety. And there was a person who died there 45 years ago in a winter storm. And so we couldn't move all these people into an unsafe area. And so that is still in litigation. And that's not something I can't talk about the litigation. We just know that the planning board made a determination. The board of trustees is supporting the planning board, and this is defending the planning board's decision in court. And I think what's happening now, the proposal isn't completely understood, but the school district, the town of Mamaroneck School District and Hampshire are talking about like a land swap, not a land swap, but giving some land to Hampshire, giving some land to the school district, and in return for the school district lobbying to go back to the plan where the village modifies the zoning and allows a multi-story building to be built in the center of this, on the portion that is the clubhouse now. And I think that even more background is in the 1920s, when Hampshire was created, it was a salt marsh. So you couldn't create, if it were still a salt marsh, there's no way you could even build a golf course there now, let alone 105 residential units.
So we're going to have to wrap this up here in a minute. So I just want you to.
So basically the portion of Hampshire that is being requested to be rezoned is in the marine zone. And we have an LWRP and several marine zones. And if we rezone Hampshire, that could affect every club in the village and also the waterfront. So it will change the character of our village. It's not just about this specific land and that specific unit. It's about changing the entire character of the village.
And I think there's probably more to come on this. I apologize. We're a little early on that. So we have a Democratic primary coming up. The voting starts this Saturday, which is July 17th. And it goes through, it's June 17th through June 25th, with the official voting day as the 27th of June. So this is the primary for the Democrats. Only Democrats can vote. Do you have any last thoughts? I think we'd be very lucky to have you. Any last thoughts you'd like to share?
Well, I love this job. And so I want to keep working for the community. So I hope people will come out and vote for me from the 17th through the 25th or on the 27th, just once, just one person, one vote. And, I think I'm making a difference. I want to continue to make a difference. And, all Democrats, please come out and vote.
Well, I think I share a lot of people's opinions saying we're very lucky to have you. We're very lucky that you throwing your hat in the ring one more time. And I wish you the best, Nora.
Thank you. Thanks, Alana.
Thank you.
Thanks, Anthony.